Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yesterday was a great day. We had a great start, and now we'll continue our day. We're very happy how smoothly our platform works. Tell us about what your experience with Pine on our chat. And today we'll focus on startup during crisis. And first speaker of the day is Gerard, who is the founding partner and CEO of Impact Guidance, who will be discussing startup survival, mainly focusing on pitching, and he will teach us how to be our own devil's advocate before someone else
everybody.
is. Please meet him.
I think we're going to put this. I'm going to put up a presentation online. I think usually I do this verbally, but I want to actually leave you with something that you can take away with as a sort of a little instruction manual. So I'm going to switch over to share screen. 1 second. And here we go. I hope you can see that. If you can't, let me know very quickly. Impact Guidance was set up about a year ago as a follow-up to 8 years I spent working for the Irish government with a government agency that's responsible for innovation and entrepreneurship, called Enterprise Ireland. It's one of the largest seed funds in Europe, actually. So over the course of probably the last 10 years, I have seen, probably from a pitching point of view, at least 500 startup companies as a kind of a juror or a member of the selection committee. I've probably seen well over 1,000. So there's a fairly good understanding about the common mistakes people make, and that's something we're going to go through now. I don't think it's as much a case of startup survival as avoiding startup seppuku or harakiri. It's so easy to turn an investor off from the first slide, the first few seconds that you actually appear in front of them. If I've seen, as I say, maybe 1,000 startups over 10 years, the average investor is probably looking at multiples of that. So, their time is precious. The last startup pitching event I was involved in was last week. We saw 50 companies over 2 mornings. The pitching was cut down to 7 minutes each company. That can often be as little as 4 minutes these days. So you really, really want to make sure that you're not putting off. And to survive, you just have to make sure that you're not killing yourself in the first second. One of the first things that happens is when a startup or an entrepreneur is just too in love with his or her own idea. There's a presumption that the idea you have is super. Don't end up explaining to somebody who's probably not a specialist in your field what the idea is. So from the very get-go, the investor is getting confused and is feeling a little bit stupid. And that's one of the problems, I think, especially with high-tech and university spin-off type startups, that what you're dealing with is usually quite complicated. And an investor is just going to feel inadequate when you're explaining something you clearly understand a lot about and they don't. I think the other thing is, you often, because you're so in love with the idea, you don't explain what the problem it's solving is, what the actual end goal is in terms of how this startup idea is going to improve the world, or it's going to change something, or it's going to optimize user usage. So there are things you have to get really, really clear right from the very start. Just be super clear and try and explain as if you're talking to, if not a child, then perhaps your mother or father, just to make sure it's clear. And it's much better to be over-explaining simply than under-explaining in a complicated way. Often, you ignore what's in it for the investor. You're so busy explaining what the thing is about. You're so busy explaining what your market competitors are up to, if you're doing that you don't tell the investor what the end game for them is, why they should get involved,
Sorry
why
to
they should get
interrupt,
enthusiastic.
but we can't see your screen. Can you share it again?
You can. Yeah. Did you see any of it?
Not yet.
Okay, 1 second. I'll put it up through the I'll put it up
Mhm.
through here. You can go
Yes,
through it. Will I start
great,
again? Did you get
thank
any of
you.
the?
And sorry for interrupting.
Okay, so that's okay. Well, I don't know if did you hear the first couple of comments? We got this far. I think that as I was explaining this here anyway. It's key to explain to an investor in as simple a form as possible exactly what the idea is and the problem is. Again, if you're too in love with your own idea, then it can be very difficult for people to understand what you're talking about and get involved and get enthusiastic. You really need to explain to an investor what's in it for them, why they should invest, why they should get excited, and where the exit position is. They're not just going to throw money at something and not know what it needs to merit to their end and whatever multiple that needs to merit to their end. You have to think through that very often. I'd say of the 50 startups I saw last week, I would say maybe 10 of them actually addressed. The next thing is, again, presentation. Again, because of the excitement about your idea. You mightn't put as much effort into the design of your presentation, the layout of your presentation, the clarity of your presentation. And if it looks sloppy, it's going to really put someone off. So, you have to respect the investor and the fact that they see, hundreds of these things all the time, and really try and polish the material they're showing, whether it's a PowerPoint or a PDF or a teaser. Just make sure a little bit of effort. There's plenty of people who can do this stuff online. It's not just a question of design, it's just general information layout. A big problem is once you've got over those first few hurdles, you made a good impression with your presentation, you've made a good impression with the idea, and you haven't done your market research. You haven't put your effort into the financials. You haven't, again, thought about what the market is and what the competition is like, but also how you're showing how you're going to be spending money to an investor. And that's something that's really obviously important for them, because they might get 5 minutes into a presentation and suddenly your figures don't match up. And they feel a little bit offended as a result of that. Team for most investors is probably the most important thing, even more important than the idea. An idea you can impress someone with for a few minutes, but if you haven't got the team to back it up, you're not a startup. You're an idea, you're an R&D, you're at beta stage maybe even, but if you haven't got your team in place, then that's going to be a problem. That's something we'll come back to just a little bit later on. So your idea, again, back to this idea that you're in love with your own idea. I mean, is it as good as you think it is? And being a devil's advocate at this stage is really, really important. Many startups go all the way through to the pitching stage, not realizing that there are lots of, they call them Me Too ideas out there. They simply haven't done their Google search. They haven't looked around the market, and they've ignored almost selectively a lot of the competition that's out there. And that is something that any investor, even if they get through the pitching stage, will spend half an hour just checking up your sector to see if there's anything out there that's similar to what you have. The problem is that when you get to pitching stage, everyone has a good idea. These aren't just sort of accidental things. And you have to be aware of the fact that you're pitching not just against your competitors. You're competing against all of the other people from a whole range of sectors that are looking for the same chunk of investment that you are. So you really, really have to be convincing and make it clear that what you have is unique, and that it meets certain financial and investment requirements. A competitor, just in thinking about this, is really anyone at all who can, dip into your revenue stream. It might be someone who's doing the same thing as you, but it's certainly someone who is in the same sector as you, who might be doing something limited, but it's still something that is a choice for the end user. And that choice might be very, very basic, no matter how complicated what you have is. So don't dismiss simple competitors, primitive competitors. If they can take the money from the customer, then they're people you have to worry about and factor into your conversation with an investor. There's a very interesting graph that's used by an awful lot of the top people around the world at the moment in terms of how to determine what a good idea is. And it's all around this concept of insight consensus. An insight consensus is when a lot of people are thinking with great ideas about the same thing. And I don't know if you've come across this before or not. And this was used very much at the beginning of the investments in companies like Google and Facebook and Uber, where you have a very, very simple idea that doesn't seem to be that brilliant maybe to start with, but you can see where the market is. So you have to figure out, if you've got a very good idea that a lot of other people may have, and it will seem obvious, you're already going to be in a little bit of trouble trying to convince an investor to go for that. So for that reason, you really need to be, outside of that inside consensus position. You need to be in disruptive new territory to really impress an investor, because if you have a Me Too idea, you're going to attract Me Too investors, and you're going to find the competition is very, very tough, and also you're going to have your revenue streams disrupted really quickly. If you move on to the idea that team is important, no man or woman is an island, you cannot operate without a team. If in real estate, the idea is location, location, location. For startups, it's team, team, team. It's exactly who you've got around you. Those people don't necessarily have to be engaged by you right from the start, employed by you, but at least you have to fill in the gaps in your team. So if you're a developer, you definitely need someone who is a manager. You need someone who is the CEO. COO, you need someone who's the sales manager, you need someone who's the marketing manager to be able to get your idea out to the market. And again, you can't, it's like the standard, if you don't have the experience, you're not going to be able to get out and talk to people. And as a one man or woman band, it's going to be very difficult to do that. If it's a couple of developers and a couple of coders, it's not going to work either. So really think about who you have around you in your peer group to be able to push things forward, and make sure that they're included in any pitch, and make sure that those people are able to communicate, that they're efficient, that they're professional, again, in dealing with the investor. From day one, when you're making your presentation, if it's well presented, there are going to be questions. Those questions have to be answered, and they have to be answered by the competent people. So if they're not technical questions, they're sales questions, you really need someone, at least in your entourage, who can really push that. And again, it's like you can't walk onto a professional football field against 11 players with 4 players. You can't walk onto a professional football team pitch with 11 players who are professional and you're amateurs. So you really, really need to think a little bit about this and make sure that you're covering all of the stops that will be important from an investor who sees that you're looking beyond the pitch. You're basically looking at least 18 months into the future to be able to actually be interested. Know thy investor. And this is a really important thing. Apart from your family and friends, your investor is going to be the most important person in your life for the next 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, until you get to an exit point. And if you don't remember that, and if you don't accept it from day one, that you're making an acquaintance with somebody who's going to be with you all the way, and that person is incredibly important for everything that happens in your life and your startup. So change that to not know thy investor, but love thy investor. Make thy part of your daily life, and make sure it's someone that you have good communication with. Startups make the mistake of not really wanting, again, to understand what the investor is there for. What motivates them? What makes them tick? Why are they even sitting there listening to these ideas? Is it all about money? Is it about, altruism? Is it about fixing the world? Is it because, maybe if it's in med devices or something, or life sciences, they had someone in their family who was sick? You really need to get into the core of it for your own benefit as much as theirs. In doing that, a lot of startups resent those really difficult questions that come along the way. A good investor has lots of questions and will ask you the things you don't want them to ask you. And they're not doing you a service. And if you're not appreciative of the fact they're asking these difficult questions, it's going to be very difficult for you to move on. Because really, at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect your idea and understand it better, but also protect their own investment. And, better that it's someone you get on with than someone you don't get on with. Again, that's where the devil's advocate side of things come in. Anyone who's asking you nasty questions is actually doing you a service. So, try to be ready for that and try to, I suppose, treat those questions both with a sense of humor, but also with a sense of purpose in trying to answer them. Again, they can save your life as a startup, but they can also really reveal who the investor is. In talking to an investor, one of the most important things you can be, obviously, is honest. Honest and sincere and full of belief about what you're trying to put across. And you need to follow your instincts, because not all of the investors are angels. You know, they're not necessarily all out there for the best for you. And you have to use your instincts to be able to actually determine that. Like, this idea of just bowing down before the investor, anyone who gives you money is great. That's not the case, because of the long-term, very intimate, very personal nature of the relationship. Very sure it's a perfect fit. And that's why, again, that relationship, to know the investor, is so important. If you get a funny feeling, if you think the investor is not for you, move on, because again, that relationship is going to last a long time. And if it's not right from the beginning, it's not going to get any better in most cases along the way. Sure, there can be some glitches when you're at pitch stage, but if you've been through a few meetings with the investor and you find that nothing is going right, or they're just annoying you, or you're annoying them, then maybe it's time to move on, because if your idea is good enough, you will find someone else to invest in it. It might take more time, but it's better to make that long-term decision and be patient than jump into bed with somebody who isn't a good fit for your idea, your morals, your outlook. Yeah, don't get up, don't end up in bed. Like the trust, and it's not a good idea. Essentials for survival, and again, we're doing break this very quick run through. You know, remember that you need to invest in more than they need to do. There's been hundreds of opportunities every single day, and you have to make it very easy for them to like you and understand what your idea is about, what you're about. And that's a certain person. They will make an effort to understand you if they like you. They will not. Try and tell the story of your idea, where it came from. Obviously, if you've got a very short enough time, it's difficult to do that. Don't ramble on, but at least try and get some idea of it. I thought of this idea because of the following, so that they understand your motivation as well. Again, make sure that you prepare the presentation and you rehearse the presentation back to front. You don't want to be reading off a screen. You want to be talking about the idea behind whatever your slides and your information on screen is telling you. Make sure you project 18 months at least ahead, because if you're not doing that, you're not serious about cash flow and spending. You know, an investor will understand really well exactly what your financial position is, and they will push to make sure that you are fully covered in the future. They expect you to run out of money, and they just want to know when you think that's going to happen. Make sure that you double your time frame for any of the estimations you're making. Everything takes so much longer than you think, especially locking down investment when due diligence, legal agreements, everything else is confirmed. If you ask a question you don't know the answer to, don't make stuff up, and you will come back with a proper answer when the time comes. And then some just very other quick things to make sure you don't commit this harakiri right at the beginning. Never mention that you've no competitors. That is crazy. There is a competitor, as I said earlier on, out there somewhere. It mightn't be exactly what you do, but if it's eating into your revenue stream, it's a competitor. Never mention IPOs, or try not to mention unicorns or becoming a unicorn, because that's just unrealistic at the very first stage. For financials, flawed detail. Yeah, flawed detail is better than lazy assumptions. Don't make lazy assumptions. Try to make sure that whatever you're assuming is backed up by some thought process. And if it's just some kind of algorithm, it's going to get spotted by an investor. An intelligent investor has seen this a million times before. So try and give them respect of trying to do something that has some real detail behind it. Again, everything has, takes more time than you think. The investor expects you to run out of money. So don't be worrying about showing them that, showing them a point in the future where you're really going to need their investment. And they will appreciate that because they've been through this so many times before. avoid vanity metrics. Don't talk about Facebook likes and Instagram posts and even competition wins unless they're big, big, big competitions. It doesn't really make any impression because everyone knows those things can be acquired, but it's opinions that don't matter. What really matters is the opinions that are formed between you and the investor as you go through the pitching session. Try not to be too passionate. There's a difference between evangelical and energetic. And there's a difference between being overly passionate and determined. Determined and gritty is good. Passionate and sort of slightly out in the clouds is not good. It comes across badly, certainly at the first stage. And then finally, I think, don't come across as too needy or desperate. An investor doesn't want to see someone who really is desperate for money. They want to feel that you've got the confidence to know you're going to get through backing of your own. So that's a very, very quick run through of the do's and don'ts as far as I've seen, again, based on an awful lot of pitches that I've seen. What I'll do is I'll put this document into a more user-friendly form, and hopefully it will help you. Some of this, I'm sure most of you already know, but at least it'll give you a consensus. A consensus built up, by the way, over the last even couple of weeks of being involved in 4 accelerator programs where people were pitching the same kind of pitches, but also were giving the same kind of feedback from, mostly Irish investment VC companies. So I hope it's helpful, and that's all I have to say for now. I hope you have some questions.
Thanks for an amazing talk. We have a few questions. One of our attendees is interested. If I have an innovative product that has no competitors, how really approaching works? Like, what happens then? How to be successful?
Well, again, I mean, no competitors. You have to be very, very careful with that concept, because there mightn't be someone with a similar product to what you have. What you have might be unique or a unique version, but somewhere out there, there's someone who is solving or addressing the problem that you were addressing. So first of all, just make sure that you know the competitor is, even if it's someone who's got some, a plastic broom or something, and you're offering this sort of hugely innovative kind of thing, you have to really be careful to make sure that you mention that. As I said, investors will be put off by the phrase, we've got no competitors. You really have to show them that, okay, we've got no direct competitors, but we have people who are in similar areas, but this is how we're better. So it's back to the standard kind of USP, unique selling proposition idea, that you have, in some way, you've improved on what's on the market. You're unique in approaching it from the direction you're approaching it from, because if you look hard enough, somewhere out there, somebody has got something that is similar. Even if you're talking about areas like quantum computing and stuff like that, there's still someone out there that's working on something similar. So 2 things. Again, try and be as broad in your thinking about what a competitor might look like. Again, using the rule that it's anyone who could be taking some of your revenue stream. And then the other side of it is to make sure that with the perhaps similar ideas that are out there, to make sure that you're pointing out how much more super incredible your startup idea is.
Thank you. Another question. Also, you mentioned honesty. Should we share our fears and weaknesses with investors? Won't it reduce chances that they will invest in our businesses?
Well, if you're at the pitching stage and you're looking for money, you shouldn't have too many dark secrets, I suppose. And if you do, the investor will find out, if maybe not after the first conversation or the second conversation, but when they ask for copies of your, financials for the last year or whatever, if you've already had funding, or if they do any due diligence, or they start really engaging with how you've been spending money and what money you've used. I think that the place that this comes up more often than ever is when there's already been investment, and perhaps there's been government investment involved in a company. And a company doesn't necessarily count that as investment. They might think it's a grant, or they might not want to fully disclose the obligations that are there in front of a previous investor or government investor, I mean, you're really much better off trying to be as honest as possible from the start. Because if there's something that's so bad that later on it'll put an investor off, then you really shouldn't be at this stage. You should have factored that in. So, I think you can be. You don't necessarily have to expose yourself, but you certainly have to indicate as clearly as possible, especially when it comes to money, what the current situation is, who you have obligations to, who you owe money to. If you've got, a credit line or you've got credit financing, to be very clear about that. And it's up to the investor. If he likes your idea and he likes you, he will find a way to get over that.
Yes, great. And I will add my own question here. I heard from my colleagues that some investors from different regions and parts of the world have a different attitudes and approaches to startups. You had a very international experience, like Western and Eastern world. So what do you think? What is the best practice to really know the investor? Like based on other speakers' experiences, other startups' experiences, or the cultural background of this country or the investor?
I think it's a mixture. It's like getting to know, if you just go back to the basic rule about personalities and people, there are cultural differences in any relationship. All the questions you should ask yourself in a normal relationship, trying to understand someone, where they come from, checking their media profiles, their social media, looking at what their company has done in the past, what their interests have been, to see if they have had companies that have had exits in the past. That will show you whether they're really into completing a process or they're only interested in starting it. But ultimately, if you can't find that common language, in the current environment, obviously, it's really important to try and spend as much time as you can particularly on video, on Zoom or on Skype or whatever, on Pine, to try and get to know people. I think it's going to be more difficult in the next 6 months to push stuff forward, because from my experience, a lot of investors are not investing at the moment because they really do want to come and do a site visit, or they want to have face-to-face meetings with people to start investing in a company where you haven't physically met the people yet. You haven't visited them, or they haven't visited you. Is going to be very difficult over the next 6 months. But I think it's standard human rules, and you need to put time into the relationship, and you also need to move the relationship out of just the professional side of things into the personal side. So as I say, you're going to be mixing with someone, you're going to be working with someone, and in a mutually obligatory or responsible relationship for several years. So, you really need to spend the time before signing the contract or signing that on the dotted line to get to know them. And as I say, use all of the intuitional tools that you have to figure out, is this person just simply, it's not going to work. I don't know if that sounds a bit vague, but it's really down to people.
Yes. Also, like when it comes to pitching, a lot of people think that you need to have charisma or you need to have confidence. And most of the people are thinking that it's some kind of personal trait more than skill that you can, master it. What do you think about it? Is it a skill, or you're just born to be a charismatic person?
There are people who are born to be charismatic, and there are people who can pick it up as a skill. Absolutely. There's some people who are very, very confident. But that confidence sometimes, especially if it's not backed up by the detail, the thing about confidence people is they can use that and expect it to hide deficiencies in their ideas. So what we found is that people who are actually quite shy, possibly introverted, but highly technically qualified, are much better at explaining a detailed idea than someone who's charismatic. But somebody who's like that, who's introverted, shy, and more technically qualified, absolutely can learn how to pitch. And again, an investor is not looking for a TV show host or a pretty face. An investor is looking for a good idea backed by people who know how to take care of every step of the process of making that profitable. So the founder could be someone who is very socially awkward and brilliant, but they may have a marketing person who's very confident. And in that kind of a case, for pitching, you're probably better off working as a double act with the marketing person, asking someone who's a friend of yours who you intend working with you on the sales and development side of things to do a pitch with you. Or let them do it completely. You prepare the deck, but you get someone maybe who's confident, more media friendly, more used to sitting in front of cameras to do it. But I mean, I definitely believe it's something you can learn to do. If you believe you can learn to do it. Any pitch, 5-minute pitch can be learned and rehearsed, and it comes down to doing things you may not normally do, standing in front of a mirror, recording yourself, and getting comfortable with what you see on screen. But I mean, I definitely think it's doable. But I think at the end of the day, an investor will excuse someone who is a little bit shy and awkward for a brilliant idea, as opposed to someone who is confident but isn't explaining something, or is explaining something that is empty.
Yeah, from that point of view, like it comes like how important really teamwork is. Like you have mentioned during your talk, that it's not a solo game, it's like a team play. And our next question is it important for a team to gather up and work in real life?
Well, I mean, obviously the team has to be people who preferably know each other. Again, nobody expects the team to be employed, engaged, paid at startup stage, at this early stage. But once you get, what you should be saying to the investor is, if you give me money, I will employ these people. These people are all highly qualified. Here are their resumes. Here's a brief description of them. So one of the benefits that we will get from your investment will be building that team. And of course, these days teams can work remotely, but I think they have to be people who spend time together, whether it's again online or in person, that they understand what the founder's vision of things are and they buy into that. Because again, it's a long-term commitment. I mean, it takes a long time to get a startup off the ground. So obviously you need people who you get on with, who support you, and who understand each other. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about founding a team. How do you think, is it possible to have a founding team even though that you are?
Yeah, well, I think if your idea, it's like any other creative. That's the creative side of it, I suppose. From my experience of dealing, for example, with film production or music production, for example, you never have a budget to start with. What you have is a great idea. And if you excite people with that idea, someone's sitting in a job, for example, in Microsoft, and they're looking for something they really want to do that's exciting them. You come along with something that pushes all their buttons. They're not going to leave their job until there's funding there, but they're certainly willing to make a commitment and use their spare time to come in behind you. So, I think you can get some very, very good people, including very good mentors. I mean, you can get an awful lot of successful people who are in the same field as you to back you up if your idea is good enough. They're not going to charge you money to start with. They're going to back you because the idea is really cool and it's going to make things better for the world, the end user, or whatever.
Our audience is really interested in this topic. When it comes to investing, which is more important, a good team or
starting
a market opportunity?
Up the team. I mean, it kind of balances out. Most investors, as I mentioned in the presentation, will prioritize team over idea and over market opportunity. But the market opportunity obviously is extremely important to outline. So it's a little bit chicken and an egg. If you have a huge market opportunity but you don't have a team, it's not going to happen. If you have a really good team but the market opportunity isn't there, then you're obviously wasting your time. So one of the keys of, I suppose, this early stage startup process is it's idea, team, and market opportunity, all working together. And that's where the genius happens. And that's a lot of the time where that non-consensus insight comes into it. I mentioned it was an insight consensus, but the non-consensus insight in an area where there's a real market opportunity, if the right team is pushing the right idea, that's where people become immortal. That's where you get your Ubers from, your Facebooks from, your Googles from, to an extent, even your Teslas from. So, yeah, I mean, you really can't have,
like,
you can't have just a good idea with no team and no market opportunity. You can't have a good team with no idea, no market opportunity. So it is a combination of things, and that's why when you look at the pitching competitions, the marks that they give for presentations are split over those areas. So you have, initial idea, what does it do and how does it improve the world? Who is the team behind it? What is the market opportunity? And then what is the exit strategy for the investor? Like those four things usually take up 80% of the marks that people get when they're pitching stuff, when they're judging them.
Wow. Thank you so much for such an interesting discussion and also talk. I think we all learned a lot about this topic and pitching, because I think that generally people think that they know how to pitch, but actually you need a lot of things to
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, I would say that 90% of the pitches that I see and have seen presume that they've got it right, and 90% of them somewhere along the way haven't considered some of those things that are in the presentation. So you really have to be super self-critical, and if you do that, again, be that devil's advocate, then hopefully by the time you get in front of an investor, you'll be fine. You're welcome. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And
okay, good luck,
now.
and good luck with the rest of
the
the sessions. Okay, bye.
Thank you.